The hum of the space station's corridors echoed in Ambassador Elisa Raya's ears as she paced along the polished floor, the anticipation in the air nearly tangible. This was it. After years of uncertainty, diplomatic talks, and preparations, humanity was about to make its first official contact with the Solar, an alien species whose peaceful overtures had reached Earth for the last 5 years. Today, the grand promise of intergalactic cooperation would begin in earnest. Rise had spent countless hours preparing for this day, working alongside the best minds in Earth's diplomatic corps, and now all that remained was to ensure the peace would hold. The space station, a monumental structure suspended in the emptiness of the stars, felt both serene and overwhelming. Its walls shimmered with advanced technology, capable of withstanding any external threat and supporting delicate negotiations between species. It had been built specifically for this occasion, a neutral ground where no one would feel the pressure of territorial claims or hidden agendas. As she stepped into the grand chamber for the opening ceremony, Raya's eyes briefly met those of her fellow diplomats, men and women whose careers had led them to this moment, each one of them brimming with a mixture of awe and fear. Their mission was clear: to ensure that humanity's first step into the galactic stage was one of peace, cooperation, and respect. The lights dimmed as the doors to the chamber slid open, and the Solar delegation entered. They moved with fluid grace, their elongated forms and smooth metallic skin gleaming under the station's artificial lighting. Their eyes, large, black, and deep, seemed to absorb the room, taking in every detail with an almost unsettling calmness. Rice couldn't help but feel a twinge of discomfort at their serene demeanor. Were they just as nervous as humanity? Or were they already too accustomed to contact with other species, their minds far ahead of Earth's in terms of galactic experience? Psylocke, the leader of the Solar, was the first to step forward. He was tall, even by Solar standards, with an aura of confidence that immediately commanded attention. His voice was smooth, almost melodic, as he greeted the humans. "We have waited for this moment for many years," he said, his words carrying a deep, resonating tone. "Today, we begin a journey of mutual understanding and discovery." Rise bowed slightly in respect, a diplomatic gesture she had practiced countless times. "The honor is ours, Psylocke," she replied. "Humanity is eager to begin this new chapter of peaceful exploration and cooperation." The exchange felt smooth, like the start of a well-rehearsed play. Both sides smiled, exchanged pleasantries, and moved through the formalities with practiced ease. They presented each other with symbols of goodwill: a small artifact from Earth, a holographic representation of Earth's solar system, and in return, the Solar offered a stunning piece of crystalline art, a representation of the stars they had charted in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. But beneath the surface of calm words and polite gestures, Reyes could sense something. A flicker, a slight hesitation, a moment where a Solar delegate's eyes lingered a bit too long on the humans. It wasn't hostility. Not yet, but it was something else, something unspoken. Her instincts, honed through years of diplomatic experience, told her that this peace was fragile. The stakes were higher than anyone was willing to admit. As the ceremony progressed, the mood shifted, a subtle tension that no one could ignore. Rise watched carefully, trying to decipher the true intentions behind the Solar's polished exterior. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect. The question lingered in the back of her mind. Was this really a new beginning, or were they walking into a carefully laid trap? The truth, she realized, would not come until later. Today was only the beginning. The formalities were over, and now came the part that everyone had been waiting for: the chance to sit down and talk. The tension in the air had shifted from one of cautious optimism to something more tangible. Both sides were eager to begin the exchange of knowledge and ideas. The human delegation, though still on edge, could not help but feel a sense of awe as they stood in the presence of the Solar. Their technological advancements were beyond anything Earth had imagined, and yet their demeanor suggested a calm, almost philosophical approach to their existence. Ambassador Reyes took her seat across from Xylox, the Solar leader, whose smooth alien features gave no hint of the unease she felt. Despite the outward calm, something gnawed at her. She wasn't sure if it was the sharpness in the Solar's eyes or the cool detachment of their presence, but there was an underlying uncertainty. Yet she pushed it aside. Today was supposed to be about forging a path forward. Today was supposed to be about peace. "Tell us," Reyes began, trying to ease the growing weight in her chest. "What do you see for the future of our species in this galaxy?" Xylox's deep, glossy eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink. "The future of the Solar and humanity is intertwined," he said slowly, his voice low and melodic. "We believe in a universe where the sharing of knowledge is paramount. The galaxy is vast, and yet it is filled with those who are blind to the potential of cooperation." Reyes nodded, her pulse quickening at the profound nature of his words. The concept of universal unity was something humanity had dreamed of for centuries, and to hear it expressed so openly by a species this advanced felt surreal. There was something undeniably alluring about the Solar's ideals, their belief that all sentient beings could come together for a higher purpose. The conversation continued, shifting from the philosophical to the practical. They discussed the technologies the Solar had developed, and in turn, the humans shared their own scientific breakthroughs. Reyes couldn't help but be captivated as Xylox described the Solar's advanced spacefaring capabilities, systems that allowed them to travel vast distances, crossing through wormholes that humans had only theorized about. In exchange, the humans offered insights into their more recent developments in artificial intelligence and resource management. As the conversation unfolded, the room seemed to glow brighter with the potential of what was being discussed. There was something almost intoxicating about the possibilities. Cooperation, after all, was a powerful thing. Reyes could already see the broad strokes of what might come: joint scientific missions, shared knowledge, peaceful exploration of the stars, the very foundations of a galactic alliance. Xylox leaned forward slightly, his expression softening as he spoke. "We have much to offer you, Ambassador Reyes, and I believe your people will have much to offer us in return." The warmth in his words was real, and Reyes felt a genuine hope stirring inside her. This was the moment humanity had dreamed of, the chance to become part of something larger than itself. For the first time since entering the station, Reyes allowed herself to relax. The Solar's presence was no longer a looming mystery. It was a bridge to the future, a future that was within reach. As the meeting continued, the laughter in the room grew more frequent, the conversation more familiar. The Solar were not distant, unreachable beings. They were people, too, intelligent, curious, and full of possibilities. Despite her earlier reservations, Reyes felt herself drawn in. The initial warmth between the two species was genuine, and for a fleeting moment, she believed it could last forever. But in the back of her mind, the nagging doubt remained. How long could this peace truly last? How long before someone, threatened to tear it all apart? The answer, she feared, would come sooner than anyone anticipated. The shift in atmosphere was subtle at first, barely perceptible. The conversation had been flowing smoothly, but there was a momentary break in the exchange, a brief silence that felt heavier than it should have. Reyes noticed it, and so did the others around the table. The tension that had been hovering just beneath the surface of the Solar's polished diplomacy suddenly became more pronounced. Ambassador Reyes leaned forward, trying to maintain the calm that had defined the meeting until now. She could see Xylox still smiling, still speaking, but there was something in his eyes, something calculating, as though he was preparing to reveal a truth that might shatter the delicate trust that had been built in the last few hours. "We have much in common, Ambassador," Xylox began, his tone still measured but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "But there is a matter we must discuss before further cooperation can be established." Reyes straightened in her chair. She hadn't expected this. The sudden shift was unnerving, but she masked it with a calm expression. "What matter do you refer to, Xylox?" she asked, her voice steady. Xylox's gaze flickered to one of the Solar delegates sitting nearby. The delegate, a tall, angular figure with sharp features and unsettlingly quiet eyes, nodded in response. The room seemed to hold its breath as the tension escalated. "The matter of the Solar's borders," Xylox continued. "There are regions of space that the Solar have long considered their own, despite not having formally claimed them. These areas are vital to our future." Reyes furrowed her brow. This was not what she had expected. The Solar had never made any mention of territorial claims during the preliminary talks. In fact, they had seemed eager to stress their commitment to peace and shared knowledge. But now, it was as if a dark cloud had descended over the negotiations. "We had hoped," Xylox said, his voice growing more firm, "that your people would respect the areas we have kept secret. These systems are ours, Ambassador, ours to protect, ours to explore, and we do not share them lightly." The human delegation exchanged uneasy glances. What Xylox was describing sounded nothing like the cooperation they had been promised. Reyes' mind raced. This was not the peaceful first contact they had prepared for. They had come to build alliances, not to navigate territorial disputes. Before she could respond, the sharp-featured delegate from earlier stood. His presence seemed to amplify the tension in the room. His voice was cold, and every word he spoke felt like a challenge. "You have no right to encroach on Solar's territory," the delegate said, his eyes narrowing. "Humanity's advances have been alarming. Your kind has a habit of expanding beyond what is rightfully yours. We cannot allow that." Reyes stiffened, feeling the weight of the accusation. "We have not come to take what is yours, nor to invade. We are here to share knowledge, to learn, and to cooperate." Her words were measured, but her heart was pounding. The accusation, though unprovoked, was not entirely unfounded. History had shown that human exploration often led to conflict. Territorial disputes were hardly a new concept. The room went silent as the Solar delegates exchanged tense looks. Reyes realized that this was not just a diplomatic misstep. It was a deliberate move, a test, perhaps, or a challenge. Then, without warning, one of the Solar delegates, an alien with long, translucent limbs, reached for a human diplomat seated at the far end of the table. The gesture was so swift, so unexpected, that no one could react in time. With a sharp motion, the Solar grabbed the diplomat by the arm, pulling them roughly from their chair. Reyes stood up immediately, her heart racing. The situation had taken a horrifying turn. "Let them go," she commanded, her voice shaking but firm. The Solar holding the diplomat didn't respond. Instead, their gaze flicked to Xylox, who stood silently, his expression unreadable. "This is your warning," Xylox said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Your people are not welcome in the areas we protect. Leave now or face the consequences." Reyes felt the room close in on her. The diplomatic meeting, which had begun with hope and warmth, was now teetering on the edge of a full-scale crisis. The stakes had shifted from peaceful negotiation to survival. She could feel the hostility radiating from the Solar, the sudden shift from openness to aggression. What had started as an opportunity to secure a future for humanity among the stars was now a dangerous game, one that would require more than diplomacy to resolve. Ambassador Reyes' heart raced as she stood frozen, watching the Solar delegate clutching the human diplomat. The room felt like it was closing in around her. She had always known that diplomacy could be a delicate balancing act. But this was something far worse. One wrong move, one misstep, and the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build would crumble. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way out, something to de-escalate the situation before it spiraled further. "Let go of them," Reyes said, her voice commanding, though her stomach churned. She was trying to sound calm, composed, but the panic bubbling beneath the surface was hard to hide. The Solar holding the diplomat didn't flinch, their expression unreadable. The tension in the room was thick enough to suffocate, and the silence felt like a countdown to disaster. The human diplomat, a young woman named Claire, struggled slightly in the Solar's grasp, but was held fast. Reyes could see the fear in Claire's eyes, the same fear she herself felt, but was determined not to show. The Solar leader, Xylox, stood motionless at the head of the table, his deep, glossy eyes never leaving the ambassador. He had not spoken since issuing his ultimatum. Now, his silence spoke volumes. "You've made a mistake," Reyes said, forcing the words past her clenched teeth. "We are not your enemies. We have no desire to take what is yours. This hostage situation is unnecessary." Xylox finally spoke, his voice low but filled with an eerie calm. "You misjudge us, Ambassador Reyes. This is not just a negotiation. This is a demonstration of our power." His words hung in the air like an unspoken threat. "You will leave our space or face the consequences. You will understand that we do not tolerate intruders." The human delegation stood on edge, each person unsure whether to act or wait for a sign that the Solar would relent. Reyes could feel the weight of their eyes on her, the pressure to do something, anything, to bring an end to the standoff. "Xylox, please," she said, her voice softer but firm. "This is not the way to secure your future, nor ours. We can work together. We have always believed in peaceful resolution." She gestured toward the diplomat still held captive. "This hostage is a symbol of what's at stake here. If you harm them, we will have no choice but to respond." Xylox's expression hardened, his eyes glinting with an unspoken resolve. "Then it is your choice, Ambassador. You will leave, or we will show you that your people's survival depends on how you act in the face of our power." The room was filled with tension so thick it felt suffocating. Raya's mind raced, trying to piece together a solution, but there seemed to be no easy way out. This wasn't the diplomatic dance she had prepared for. This was no longer a conversation. It was an ultimatum. And worst of all, she realized she had little leverage to force the Solar to back down. Raya's heart sank as she considered the impossible choice ahead of her. If she didn't act decisively, they would lose the fragile peace they had hoped to build. But how could she act in the right way? Violence wasn't the answer, but was there any other choice? "Xylox," Reyes said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "You can take us as your enemies, but you don't need to. Let this be the moment where we prove to you that humanity doesn't fight unless it has to. Let us prove that our desire is for peace." For a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in Xylox's eyes. Just a flicker. Then, without warning, one of the other Solar delegates, a tall, angular figure who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his voice cold and cutting. "Enough of this," the delegate snarled, his eyes narrowing. "The time for peace is over. The humans have chosen their side." He turned to the diplomat, still held by the Solar, and with a single, swift movement, pressed a device to the captive's neck. The device hummed ominously. "No," Reyes shouted, her pulse spiking. But it was too late. The device emitted a sharp, crackling sound as it activated, sending a pulse of energy through the diplomat's body. The human collapsed to the ground, unconscious but alive. The room froze in shock. Xylox's eyes never left Reyes, his expression unreadable, as if he had expected this all along. "This is the price of defiance," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Your people will learn that peace is a privilege, not a right. You've made your choice." Reyes' world seemed to spin in that moment. The implications of what had just occurred were devastating. The Solar had taken a human hostage, and now they had proven they were willing to go further if pushed. But Reyes was no stranger to high-stakes diplomacy. If this was a test, it was one she could not afford to fail. Her mind snapped back to the present as she made her choice. "Then, we have no choice but to stand our ground," she said, her voice low but fierce. "Release the diplomat, or face the consequences of your actions." It was a gamble, one that could lead to open conflict, but the humans had nothing left to lose. The game had changed, and Reyes was ready to play it to the bitter end. The air in the room seemed to crackle with an energy all its own. The Solar's silence was deafening, each moment stretching out, thick with tension. Ambassador Reyes stood frozen, her heart pounding, as the diplomatic nightmare she had feared was now fully realized. The hostage, their colleague, lay motionless on the ground, and every second felt like a countdown to a confrontation that would determine humanity's place in the galaxy. Stylock's expression remained inscrutable, his glossy eyes never wavering from Reyes as the tension in the room mounted. He hadn't moved since the device had been activated on the human diplomat, and yet his presence felt like a looming storm, threatening to break at any moment. Reyes' mind raced, trying to find any avenue of escape, some way to de-escalate the situation. But as she looked around, the faces of her fellow diplomats only reminded her that they were in uncharted territory. The Solar weren't acting like the peaceful, cooperative species they had promised to be. They were acting like conquerors, demanding obedience rather than collaboration. "You've made a grave mistake," Zylox, Reyes said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "We came here seeking peace, but this is an act of war. If you think this will bend us to your will, you're wrong." Zylox took a step forward, his tall, metallic form casting a shadow over her as he spoke. "Your threats are empty, Ambassador. We have the power to ensure your people understand who controls the future. This is not a negotiation. This is a lesson." The words hit Reyes like a slap. The Solar had never intended to be allies. They had only played the part of peaceful negotiators to lure humanity into a trap. This was never about cooperation. It was always about control. And now they had made it clear that humanity's survival in the galaxy would depend on submission, not mutual benefit. "Release her," Reyes demanded again, her voice now filled with an edge of desperation. "You've made your point. Don't make the situation worse than it already is." But the Solar delegate holding the diplomat remained unmoving, his hand still resting on the device that had incapacitated Claire. The scene was surreal. Reyes had never imagined a first contact scenario would evolve into something so brutal, so quickly. She had believed the Solar would be above this kind of aggression, that their advanced civilization would see the value in peaceful cooperation. But instead, they had shown their true colors in a way that left no room for negotiation. One of the human delegates, a veteran diplomat named Jason, stood up from his seat, a determined look in his eyes. "We can't let this go on," he said, his voice low but resolute. "We need to act now. If we don't, they'll think they can push us around whenever they want." Reyes glanced at him, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Jason was right, but the options available to them were limited. Direct confrontation was out of the question. Humanity was still far behind the Solar in terms of military technology, and a conflict could easily spiral out of control. But if they backed down now, the Solar would not only have won this battle, they would have secured dominance over humanity's future. Reyes took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving Zylox. There had to be another way. A way to turn the tide without losing everything they had worked for. "We're not leaving," she said firmly, meeting his gaze with all the resolve she could muster. "But we won't act recklessly, either. You've taken one of ours, and that will not go unanswered. But if you release her now, we can still salvage what remains of this peace." Zylox's lips twitched slightly, as if considering her words. His gaze flickered for just a moment, a hint of something almost like curiosity in his eyes. But then the moment passed, and he spoke in that same measured tone, though his words were colder than before. "You overestimate your position, Ambassador. You will leave this station or face the full weight of our power. Your people have been warned." Reyes could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her, the eyes of her fellow diplomats fixed on her, waiting for a signal to act. She could sense the growing panic among the humans. It was a defining moment. If she backed down now, it could destroy any hope for peace. If she pushed too hard, it could trigger something much worse than anyone was prepared for. Then, Just as the tension reached its peak, a voice broke through the silence. "Psylocke, stop." It was a different Solar delegate, one who had been silent for much of the meeting. This one was smaller, his frame more delicate, his features more expressive. He stepped forward from the shadows, his gaze fixed on Psylocke, and for the first time, there was a hint of defiance in his tone. "You've gone too far," the delegate said quietly, but with undeniable conviction. "This was not our agreement. The humans came in good faith. You were to be our allies, not our enemies." Psylocke turned sharply, his expression darkening, but the new delegate did not flinch. There was a long moment of silence before Psylocke slowly, almost reluctantly, turned his gaze back to Reyes. "Release the diplomat," he commanded, though his voice had lost its earlier arrogance. The Solar delegate holding Claire stepped back, and with a soft hum, the device on her neck powered down. The diplomat stirred, gasping, as she regained consciousness, though still visibly shaken. Reyes let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She glanced at the human delegation, exchanging looks of relief, but there was no time for celebration. The Solar had shown their hand, and nothing would ever be the same again. The game had changed, and now it was time for humanity to decide what kind of future they would fight for. The room was filled with a strange, uneasy quiet as the Solar delegate stepped back from the human diplomat, releasing her from the device's grip. Claire slowly regained her bearings, blinking as she took in her surroundings. Her breath came in shallow gasps. But she was alive, something that had seemed uncertain moments earlier. Reyes watched her closely, then turned her focus back to Psylocke, whose expression had shifted from cold authority to something more calculating. "Consider this your final warning, Ambassador," Psylocke said, his voice now devoid of the earlier fury. There was an almost chilling calmness to his words, as if the situation had become a mere inconvenience to the Solar. "Your species' actions have consequences, and we will not tolerate further threats to our sovereignty." Reyes couldn't shake the feeling that this had been a test, a carefully orchestrated moment to see how far humanity could be pushed before they would submit. They had been pushed, and though the immediate crisis had been averted, she knew the damage had already been done. The balance of power had shifted, and now the Solar would view humanity through a different lens, one of wariness, if not outright hostility. "I understand your position, Psylocke," Reyes said, her voice steady but laced with an edge of frustration. "But if you think this will break us, you're mistaken. Humanity will not cower to threats or intimidation. If peace is still on the table, we will fight for it. But if not, then we will prepare for what's next. And make no mistake, we will not stand idly by." Psylocke regarded her for a moment, his sharp gaze piercing. The room was thick with tension again, but something had shifted in the Solar leader's eyes. For the first time since the hostage situation began, there was a flicker of something, an emotion that wasn't cold calculation or superiority. It was curiosity. "You speak boldly for someone so outmatched," Psylocke said, his voice almost contemplative. "But I will give you this much. You are not entirely without merit. There is fire in your species, Ambassador. Perhaps you are worth considering, after all." Reyes felt a slight flicker of hope, though it was quickly dampened by the awareness of how precarious the situation was. She didn't know what Psylocke meant by considering, but she understood that the Solar's willingness to release Claire was a sign, of sorts, that they were still willing to engage. It wasn't an open offer of peace, but it was something. And right now, something was better than nothing. Before Reyes could respond, Claire shakily stood up, her legs unsteady as she moved to join the other diplomats. Her face was pale, but she gave Reyes a small nod, a silent signal that she was okay, though clearly rattled by the experience. "Thank you," Claire whispered, her voice hoarse. I thought I wasn't going to make it." Reyes placed a reassuring hand on Claire's shoulder, then turned back to face Psylocke, determination hardening in her features. I'll take this as a sign that we are not yet enemies, she said. But let's be clear, this isn't over. We still want peace. But if you test us again, there won't be any room left for negotiations. The Solar leader studied her intently, as if measuring her resolve. Finally, he nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible gesture. Perhaps, Ambassador, we will see if your kind is truly worth such investment. But understand this. The Solar do not entertain weakness. You will either stand with us or be forced to stand aside. The weight of his words hung in the air like a sword over their heads. Rise knew the Solar would never fully trust humanity, especially after what had just happened. But she also knew this could still go either way. The Solar's power, their technology, was beyond anything humanity could dream of, and yet she had seen a glimmer of doubt in their eyes. That was something. We will be prepared, Rise replied firmly, meeting Xylox's gaze. But we will continue to reach for peace. For humanity's future, we will not give up. Xylox's lips curled into something resembling a smile, though it was hard to tell if it was mocking or genuinely intrigued. Very well, Ambassador. We shall see how your species fares in the days to come. But know this, there is no middle ground with the Solar. You will either rise, or you will fall. As the words settled between them, the atmosphere in the room shifted once again. The immediate threat had passed, but the rift between the two species had only deepened. Rise knew that the path ahead would not be easy. They had gained a temporary reprieve, but the Solar's warning was clear. Humanity's survival in this galaxy would depend on their ability to prove their strength and resolve, and they would need to do so quickly before the Solar decided humanity was more trouble than it was worth. The first contact that had begun so optimistically now felt like a fragile thread, dangling over an abyss. Rise was keenly aware that the real struggle was only just beginning. The dance of diplomacy would be delicate, and humanity's next move could determine everything. The weight of Xylox's words lingered in the room long after he finished speaking. The Solar had shown their hand, and it was clear that humanity's survival among the stars would not be guaranteed by peaceful intentions alone. Every diplomat in the room understood the gravity of the situation, but no one dared speak of it aloud just yet. It was as if the brief hostage crisis had silenced the very air they breathed. Rise turned away from Xylox, her mind spinning, searching for some glimmer of hope amidst the overwhelming odds. She glanced at her team. Claire had already joined the others, and though still shaken, she was trying to compose herself. Jason, the veteran diplomat, stood by the wall, his brow furrowed as if wrestling with the implications of what had just transpired. Rise walked over to him, her voice low but urgent. "What do we do now?" she asked, a sense of helplessness creeping into her words. She didn't want to admit it, but it felt like they were playing a game far beyond their understanding. Humanity had never faced such a powerful adversary, one that could twist diplomacy into something so dangerous. Jason exhaled slowly, his eyes distant as he weighed her question. "We need to send a message back to Earth. But this changes everything. The Solar aren't just looking for allies. They're testing us. They want to see if we're strong enough to keep up. If we give them any sign of weakness, they'll push us further into a corner." Rise nodded grimly. She knew Jason was right. Every move, every word now would be scrutinized, not just by the Solar, but by every other species in the galaxy. They were no longer just ambassadors. They were the last hope for humanity's future among the stars. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. They had survived this encounter, but she had no illusions about the next. "We need to push forward, but carefully," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We don't show fear, but we also don't provoke them further. If the Solar are truly looking to see our resolve, then we have to be a solid front. And we can't forget the other species out there. We don't know who's watching or what alliances may form in the wake of this." Jason looked at her, his eyes narrowing with thought. "I agree, but we need more than just words now. We need to show strength. They've already seen we won't back down, but we need something else to keep them from pushing too hard. If they think they can crush us, they will." Reyes glanced at the Solar across the room. Psylocke was engaged in a quiet conversation with his delegates, his back turned to her for the moment. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. They had gained a temporary reprieve, but it had come at a cost that could continue to escalate if they didn't handle it just right. "Do we have any leverage?" she asked Jason, hoping for some solution that could balance the power equation. "Anything at all." Jason hesitated. "We know they fear the unknown. The Solar may have advanced technology, but they're not omnipotent. They don't know everything about us. Maybe that's something we can use, not as a threat, but as a caution. They don't know how far we'll go, how far we've already come. They underestimate humanity." Rhea's eyes lit up with a flicker of inspiration. "Exactly. We show them that humanity's strength isn't just in our numbers, but in our ability to adapt. If they want to test us, let them. But we don't need to prove our strength by matching them blow for blow. We'll show them that we're unpredictable, unstoppable in our own way. That's something they can't control." Jason smiled faintly, impressed. "I hadn't thought of it that way. We'll have to get creative, but if we can make them second-guess their assumptions about us, it could buy us time." Reyes nodded. "Time is exactly what we need. We need to reestablish communication with Earth immediately. There's no way we can handle this alone. And we need to start building alliances, reaching out to other species. If the Solar think we're weak, they'll be emboldened. But if they see that we have allies, that changes the calculus." Jason gave a sharp nod. "I'll start drafting messages. We'll get Earth's leadership involved, and we'll send out feelers to other species we've made contact with. We can't afford to be isolated in this." Reyes turned back to the Solar, her mind still racing. This encounter had been only the beginning. The Solar might have released their hostage, but the underlying threat was still very much alive. They had seen humanity's willingness to stand firm, but Psylocke had made it clear that peace would come only on their terms. If they were to have any hope of surviving this, they would need more than just strength. They would need a way to keep the Solar guessing, to make them see that humanity was not a species to be underestimated. "We'll fight for peace," Reyes muttered to herself, her eyes steely. "But we'll make them work for it." She turned back to face the team. "Let's move forward. We don't know what the Solar will do next, but we'll be ready. Humanity's future depends on what we do now." And with that, the fragile alliance they had hoped for had shifted. Now it was a matter of survival. The hours that followed the tense meeting with the Solar were a blur of communication, planning, and strategy. Reyes and her team worked tirelessly to draft messages, sending urgent updates to Earth's leaders and reaching out to every species they had previously made contact with. The goal was clear: build alliances, gather intelligence, and prepare for what was likely to come. A test of humanity's resolve on a galactic scale. The Solar had given them no more than a fragile truce, a momentary pause in what was clearly going to be a much larger conflict. As Reyes sat in her quarters, reviewing the final drafts of the messages, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The Solar had shown their teeth, and they hadn't even begun to reveal the full extent of their power. Every minute, every decision, felt like it could tilt the balance in one direction or the other. Humanity was teetering on the edge of something huge. Her communicator chimed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Jason. "Ambassador, we've gotten a response from Earth," he said, his voice tight but urgent. "They've already dispatched reinforcements, military and diplomatic. They're rallying support from other nations, trying to make sure we have the backing we need if things escalate." Reyes felt a pang of relief, but it was fleeting. Reinforcements would take time to arrive, and the Solar didn't seem the type to wait patiently for humanity to catch up. "Good," she said, nodding as if Jason could see her. "What about the other species we've reached out to?" "Mixed responses," Jason replied. "Some are cautious. still wary of the Solar's power and reluctant to get involved in what might seem like a human conflict. Others, well, there's potential. The Coraline and the Valenthians have shown some interest. They've been in a similar situation with the Solar before, though not to this extreme. Reyes leaned back, thinking, we need them. The Solar have to realize they can't intimidate us into submission. If we can make them see we have a coalition of forces, humanity, and others who faced their tactics before, we might just have a chance at holding our ground. Agreed, Jason said. But it's a fine line. If we push too hard, we risk turning those who are on the fence against us. We need to approach this with subtlety. This isn't just about showing strength. It's about showing that we are adaptable, that we can think our way through this. Reyes sighed, her eyes scanning the latest data feeds. The Solar are right about one thing. We're not like the other species they've encountered. We fight when we have to, but we also know when to wait. This will be a battle of patience as much as it is of power. Jason paused. So what's the plan? Do we wait for Earth's reinforcements, or do we push forward now? We keep pushing forward, Reyes said with resolve, her voice firm. But we do it carefully. We make our moves visible to the Solar, but we don't give them any reason to think we're desperate. Every diplomatic move, every message to our allies, needs to show that humanity is not only surviving, but thriving. We've been underestimated before. Let's make sure they never forget it. With that, Reyes gave the order to begin sending out the first of many strategic communications. Earth's leaders would mobilize, other species would be brought into the fold, and humanity's position in the galaxy would be solidified, not just as a fledgling species, but as a force to be reckoned with. The Solar might have the upper hand now, but humanity's will was not so easily broken. As she moved from one communication channel to the next, Reyes couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing a dangerous game. Every move was a calculated risk. The Solar had demonstrated that they weren't interested in negotiation, only in asserting their dominance. But there was something else there, something deeper. A sense that the Solar had underestimated humanity's adaptability, their ability to rise above the most dire of circumstances. The night wore on, and Reyes found herself reflecting on what had led them to this point. The Solar had made it clear they wouldn't negotiate on equal terms, but humanity had something they lacked, an indomitable spirit. They had always fought for survival, for freedom, for a chance at a better future, and that was not something the Solar could take away with threats or intimidation. As the first light of dawn filtered into her quarters, Reyes stood up and looked out at the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed distant, cold, and infinite, but for the first time, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Humanity had survived its first real test among the stars, and though the road ahead would be fraught with peril, she knew one thing for certain. They would not go down without a fight. They would rise, they would adapt, and they would not be forgotten. And as long as she had breath in her lungs, she would ensure that humanity's place in the galaxy was not one of submission, but one of strength, unity, and survival. Let the Solar watch, Reyes whispered to herself. Let them see what happens when you push a species to its breaking point. Humanity doesn't break. She turned away from the window, ready for whatever came next. The long road ahead was uncertain, but she had no doubt. Humanity was ready to walk it.